Hello, everyone, and welcome to another PorscheCooled Podcast. This is episode 8. I just want to say before I start this podcast, thank you, everyone, for your support. The podcast, only very new and very soft launch of this podcast that I've been doing. We've now gone over 1,000 downloads, which is pretty fantastic. So I just want to say thank you for people who regularly listen to this podcast and who are listening now. Today, what am I going to talk about today? It's funny, I had a live chat on Instagram with Auto Amateur. If you don't know James, James has a YouTube channel called Auto Amateur. He also has Instagram called Auto Amateur, and he also has a podcast now as well, which you should check out. It's on all the main podcast outlets, etc. Apple, Google, etc. And he was telling me about the PDK, how fantastic it is and how engaging it is. I have to say I'm a little bit old-fashioned. I'm still a manual type guy with Porsche, and maybe that's because I haven't really tried it, and maybe that's because I haven't had a new 911 with the PDK transmission. And I guess the PDK transmission, the Porsche double clutch transmission is. I guess it is pretty advanced now when you think. When was it? It was originally designed for motorsport, I think, wasn't it, in the 1980s or something like that. So it is pretty advanced in the technology. Porsche have been working on it for a long time. And I guess a lot of the cars now, a lot of people, I think when you look at stats, I think I saw something on Renlist or one of those forums or something, and it had sales of cars. I think it was Renlist, actually. I think someone posts the sales in US of the cars and the specs. I think it could have been GT3. And I think even though the 991.2 GT3 was available in PDK and manual, the 991.1 GT3 was only available in PDK. And a lot of people complained to Porsche saying, why doesn't it come in manual? This is the GT3, it should be a manual. Some previous models were only manual. How could you offer it in a PDK? Well, obviously Porsche did that, and you do understand why they did it. They did it because it's a faster change. It's a faster gear change. It's fast. Power is instantaneous. Then you've got the emissions side of it with PDK. I think it's lower emissions or lower fuel or something like that. It's lighter. I think the PDK transmission is actually lighter. But I guess they put it in the GT3 because of the speed of the change, right? Because it's double clutch transmission. So you select the gear. When you're selecting a gear, the gearbox basically chooses the next gear and gets ready. The clutch opens up, and then the other one closes in rapid time. So it's so the gear changes are pretty much unnoticeable. And I've watched quite a lot of YouTube videos. People have GT3. What's his name? Mr. JWW. He had a 991 GT3 and he bought the PDK first. But I noticed he changed to the manual because he still found the manual more engaging. And this is what I was saying to James from Auto Amateur. Isn't it boring? Isn't it boring driving a PDK transmission? And I guess that's embedded in our heads, this old kind of way of thinking that an automatic is not engaging. It is a boring drive. It's good having paddle shifters, and I think paddle shifters obviously are better on a GT3. Having paddle shifters. I was driving a Q7 here, and it had paddle shifters, and it's like, why do you want to have paddle shifters on a SUV? To me, it makes no sense. If you're in auto, you're in auto. You don't really need to be engaging the gears and flipping the paddles, on a SUV or mini SUV or whatever it is. So I think the paddle shift, it's a good thing on a GT3. It's a good thing, I guess, on a 911. James says it's very, very engaging. He says the sound and the change back and the experience. And he's had a manual previously, so he's had that experience with he went from a 997 in a manual to a 991.1 Carrera, both base Carreras in a PDK, and he says it's more engaging. So I trust his opinion. Like I said, I haven't had enough experience with it. Of course, there's a lot of us purists out there, and a lot of people are just against PDK just on the principle. They're just against the automatic transmission on the principle. Maybe we need to get over that a little bit. And I think I probably need to get over it as well. I think the PDK, like I said, the fact that the gear changes are noticeable, you know what I mean? The fact that with a manual transmission, people can destroy the clutch quite easily. Maybe it's longer lasting. Maybe it's a better long-term investment by having a PDK, by the fact that it is doing it automatically, you know what I mean? And it is, you're basically not going to miss the gear changes. And I guess it depends. I guess it depends on where you drive. I guess the benefit of a PDK is if you're just driving around the city or just driving around town and you're not looking for a spirited drive on the winding roads or the twisty mountain roads. It makes your 911 more usable, I guess. It makes your 911 easier to drive. Now, in saying that, I've got a manual 997.1 Carrera. And honestly, I don't find the clutch that heavy. I guess I've never really sat in super heavy traffic, and I'm talking about driving in Sydney, Australia here. Every now and again, I do. And yeah, it gives your knee a workout, it gives your leg a workout, but I've always driven a manual car. I've never had an automatic car. All my cars that I purchased were all manual cars. So I guess that's why I'm a little bit still hesitant to shift into the PDK club. But one of my cars that I'm keen on, and one of the cars, and I was asked this in the live chat the other night about what other car would you buy if it wasn't Porsche. And I have to say I still like the Ferrari 458. And of course the Ferrari 458 is paddle shifter. It is that same sort of transmission. So but then again, the other car that I'm really keen on is the 991.1 GT3 RS, and the 991 GT3 RS only came in PDK. I think the GT3 RS is slightly tweaked though, isn't it? I think the ECU and the gear changes are tweaked a little bit better in the GT3 RS. And no doubt they're also tweaked in the GT3 compared to, say, a Carrera or a Carrera S in PDK. No doubt the change is different. And also if you get the Sport Plus, isn't it? Is it Sport Plus that it changes it as well? I'm coming around to the PDK. I really am coming around to the PDK. And like I said, maybe I'm just stuck in my old ways, and but my eyes are open now. My eyes are open. Is the PDK better than manual? Well, I guess everything is subjective, isn't it? Old-fashioned manual shifter, is still something appealing. The whole analog thing is appealing. But like I said, you can see PDK sales. PDKs actually sell very well. And like I said, even when they brought out the PDK in the GT3 991.2, those stats that I saw, and they might have been early stats, it still showed that most people still chose the PDK. But benefits of PDK, as I said, PDK is faster. It is known to be faster. You're talking about milliseconds here. You're talking about the power, getting power to the wheels quicker. It all happens very, very fast, much, much faster than you can change. You can change your gears manually, much, much faster than anyone can change manually. Does that make it less engaging? I'm not 100% sure. Like I said, I'll listen to what other people have to say who have driven it on a regular basis. James reckons it doesn't. And like I said, you watch YouTube videos, there's quite a few people who love the PDK, and there's other people who have sold their 991 GT3 in PDK and bought a manual. If you're worried about money, I guess it is more economical. The PDK and the way it's set up, the programming of it, the ECU, I think does actually apparently save fuel, which without taking away from the power delivery or the driver's experience or the driving experience. So, less fuel, so maybe it's a little bit more economical than a manual, because manual is pretty dependent on your driving skill, I guess, and how far you rev to the red line, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess you can see that PDK is probably more economical. And then we came back to the other thing that PDK has over manual. You buy a used 911, you could have a clutch that hasn't been looked after. You could have someone that's missed gears. I guess you buy a used car with a PDK transmission. You know that it's the ECU, the computer has decided on the changes. You can't miss a gear in a PDK. I guess you can't even have over revs, can you? Because it's limited. I think it still stops the over revs. So you buy a 991 or a 992, you buy in a PDK. I guess you are pretty safe in saying that the car is got more longevity. It's probably not been trashed as much as a manual transmission. And then the other thing that I said before, it's for day-to-day daily driving. It probably makes it more usable. You can drive your GT3 or your GT3 RS to the shops, and the PDK transmission would make it quite a pleasant ride. Of course, the GT3 and the GT3 RS, you've got harder suspension and you're lower to the ground and all those things that you have to take into consideration. But as a daily experience, I guess if you want a more usable sports car, a more usable GT car, the PDK sort of makes it easier. Like I said, I don't have any problems with changing gears around town or whatever, but I know it is something that people do think about. And the other thing is, I think, and as I said to James, I think the manual is more engaging and PDK is boring. The opinion seems to be that, using the paddles, in your GT3 and your turbo or whatever it is quicker driving, and it still has the same driving experience, and the sound is still there, and the change up and the change down and all of that. So you can still have fun with a PDK. It's not the traditional boring automatic driving experience that I guess is stuck in some of our heads. Those of us who are, not in their 20s would always think that automatics are a bit. The word being in Australia is gutless. They have no power. But this is not the case with these new double transmissions, double clutch transmissions. And I guess you're not going to miss any gears. You're not going to lose time in your driving. It's very precise. You know what gear you're in. You know what gear you're not in. You're not having to throw the push the clutch, which is heavy. You're not having the heavy gear throw. If you do, you can enjoy the manual mode like in the PDK. So you've got the ups and downs. You've got the sound. So the PDK, I guess, is quite simple in its technology. And I don't think Porsche would introduce something like this, you know what I mean? They've been developing it since the 80s, so they wouldn't really develop anything. They wouldn't really put these things in their cars if they weren't certain. And I watched someone from Porsche drive the GT3, and they were talking about it. And to them, they said that they would only get their GT3 in a PDK because it's much faster, it's quicker, it's precise. If you're doing track days, it's much better for track days. If you want a track day car, you should get a PDK. You shouldn't get a manual. So all these things, they all weigh in PDK's favor. And like I said, I wouldn't hesitate to buy, if a 991 GT3 RS came up at a good price, I wouldn't hesitate to buy it because it only comes in PDK. I think in a GT3 RS, I don't know if you want a manual transmission in a GT3 RS. A GT3... Everyone says, the 991.2 because Porsche released it in the manual. The manual is fantastic. It's the best car. Or not even a GT3, even the Touring, the GT3 Touring. People say get it in a manual. It's a tricky one. I think if one came up for sale and it was in PDK, and you had the opportunity to buy a 991 GT3 at a good price or a GT3 Touring at a good price, and it was in PDK. I don't think you could walk away from it now. I think you have to consider that it could still be the right sort of Porsche driving experience. And PDK is the future, really. It is. Manual cars are outnumbered. And I guess with electric cars coming through, that's another thing that's going to change, the way we see driving and the way we think about driving. But, you can still have PDK. It still can be track focused. You can still have a spirited drive. You can still enjoy those twisties. You can still enjoy, those Sunday drives without having a manual transmission. And like I said, I'm probably the worst one because I have been against PDK. But I'm starting to think now that that PDK is not a bad thing to have in a 911. I guess the perfect scenario is if you have the opportunity to have two Porsches. You have an old air-cooled or even a 997 in manual, and that's your manual Porsche. And then if you're lucky enough to be able to afford two, you get your GT3 RS or your GT3 in PDK. And I think that's probably a good scenario. You have one of each. You have the old, and I'm going to call 997, a classic now because I think it's getting to that state where it's almost classic status. I know it's over 20 years or something with Porsche before it's classic status, but 996s and 997s, obviously those you would definitely buy a manual. But, have one of those or have a 993 or have a 9964, have your analog 911, and then have your modern 911 with a very engineered gear system, a very engineered system that does a lot of the work for you, but also keeps you well engaged and keeps you focused on your driving, I guess. And I guess with PDK, you still have to be focused on your driving. You still have to know, I think having driven a manual transmission and driving a PDK, I think is an advantage. Knowing how to drive manual, knowing how to drive stick. I think it would definitely make the PDK experience a lot more enjoyable. And of course, PDK, if you're buying something like a Macan or a Panamera or things like that, of course you're going to get, you'd get PDK. You wouldn't want manual in those cars. I don't even know if they come in manual, do they? Panameras and Macans? I don't think so. But yeah, so PDK versus manual. PDK has a lot of advantages. Manual still is the purest choice. Like I said, manual for older 911, 997, 996, 993, 964 or older always has to be a manual because remember 997s come in that awful transmission, the earlier transmission, and 996 is the Tiptronic. So you would definitely get a manual in those cars, and it's exemplified in the sales prices. Manual 997s still fetch a lot more than automatics. Manual 996s, which are becoming rarer and rarer to find, still fetch more money than automatics. But when it comes to PDK, I think we have to look at all the technology that's gone into it and the design that's gone into it and the years of research that Porsche's put into it in the motorsport world, and that their double clutch transmission, is pretty unique and works really well under a lot of power. As shown in GT3 RSs and GT2 RSs. So in that coming to mind, getting the power to the wheels, obviously PDK is better. That's it for another PorscheCooled podcast. Thanks again for listening today. My name is Michael Barth. This is PorscheCooled. If you like this podcast, please follow me on any of the platforms, Apple Podcasts, Google Music, Spotify. I'm on most of them, but they're the main three. Until the next one, thanks for listening and bye for now.